Welcome to the Mental Insights Podcast, a conversation aimed at understanding all sides of mental health, addiction recovery, and homelessness. Each interview will include one's personal experiences and insights, or an expert's advice and knowledge within one of these fields. The goal is to promote awareness, guidance, and support for anyone who is affected by these challenges. Thank you all for listening. Welcome to the Mental Insights Podcast. This is your host, Brendan.cutuli. We are here today for Season 2, Episode number 8 with Rebecca Hilliard. Rebecca is the author of A World Locked Away, which is the story of a young woman's experiences through the challenges of anxiety, depression, addiction, and suicide. Rebecca learned through firsthand experience and is now sharing her knowledge with those facing similar issues. Rebecca joins the Mental Insights Podcast to speak about dissociative identity disorder. Rebecca, thank you for taking this time to be here on the Mental Insights Podcast today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful. Well, I think this is going to be a great topic as it hasn't been spoken about on the Mental Insights Podcast yet. So within dissociative identity disorder, we're going to be truly diving deep into many of the complex ways within this, treatment measures, effects, and so much more. So within the first part of the episode, we'll really just bring about the topic of information and what it truly is, and then we'll really hone in deep within the part 2 of the episode. Within dissociative identity disorder, I just wanted to bring about this statistic from the National Alliance of Mental Illness, and they stated that up to 75% of people experience at least one depersonalization or derealization episode in their lives, with only 2% meeting the full criteria for chronic episodes. So, within this being stated, can you explain more about what is dissociative identity disorder and who is at risk?
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so dissociative identity disorder, also called DID, it develops when a young child goes through extremely severe trauma or abuse. So when an infant is born, they haven't fully developed their personality yet, and that doesn't really finish developing until a child is over the age of 11. So if you're under that age and you've gone through severe trauma, as you're developing, you have different personality parts that sort of break off from the core you to hold the severe trauma that you've been through. So like for me, I was severely abused, sexually abused. And so they're called alters, usually different alternate personalities, broke off for me to hold this trauma that I went through so that I could continue living my life and going to school and functioning as a human rather than being crippled by the sexual abuse that I went through. And so those at risk of DID would be kids. So once you're an adult, you can't really develop it because your personality is already like set in stone, but it's for those kids who are still developing and who are still their identity is still forming, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I think for many disorders that people know about and face, it seems like within mental health challenges, it's a spectrum of anybody can experience this. Yet this is something that is really honed down into the, childhood approach, specifically within childhood trauma, which is, probably one of the biggest causes of many challenges that people face within mental health today. And it's something that's growing at an alarming rate. And I think one of the biggest things for this is when someone experiences a trauma at a young age, it's so hard to navigate the waters because they don't necessarily know how to reach out to share what they went through. And within, whether it's parents, whether it's friends, trying to identify if something's wrong is such a challenge. So, within this measure, if a child doesn't reach out, how can someone recognize or identify the issue at hand?
It's hard to recognize because I guess I'll just talk from personal experience. So my alters, I have 22 total, counting myself. They're really good at pretending to be me. So if they switch out and are in front and I'm back, they can pretend to be me, so that it's really hard for people to notice. Usually it takes a therapist or specialist to be able to diagnose it. So I was diagnosed by my therapist about a year and a half ago. And if you, I guess to try to tell if you had, if I hadn't been to a therapist, I never would have known I had DID, but some people who do have DID might be able to tell themselves. So symptoms of it would be like time loss is a big one, like having to be 8 a.m. and then all of a sudden it's 8 p.m. at night, and not knowing what happened during your day would be one of the main symptoms of it. And like blackouts and not remembering things, because a lot of times when the alters switch out, you go back and you're not present and you're not aware of what's happening.
Okay, so usually it's kind of a personal approach of being able to identify it, and really, before you get diagnosed with DID, is there any kind of realization or awareness of what's going on, or does it kind of feel at a norm to yourself?
It feels like a norm. I mean, it's different for everyone, but for me, it felt like normal. Like I had no idea that I had DID. And even when I was diagnosed, I was like, no way. But now that it's been a year and a half and I've had time to process it and get to know my alters, I can look back on my life and be like, totally, like they were totally there the whole time.
Interesting. Yeah, it's probably such a different perspective change when someone tells you what you're experiencing, and really at firsthand you should know. And it's kind of, it could be very tricky, especially when you don't truly understand which person or aspect you're representing at the time, and it could change and vary. And this can be some of the effects that do take place as you're experiencing this. But are there any other physical or mental effects or even emotional effects that happen, that take place when you're experiencing DID?
Yeah, so like I said, it varies for everyone. But for me, I would have like sort of inexplicable things happen, such as something minor would happen, like someone would say something that I misinterpreted to think they didn't want to be friends anymore, and would have like crying and be so upset about it. But now that I know I have DID, I can identify that as one of my alters, who's a young kid who has abandonment fears. And so she is the one who gets really upset, and whenever like she senses any sort of um abandonment, or like she's just extremely sensitive. But like me as an adult, I'm not as much, because I'm more like secure in myself and things like that. And kind of like, it's been a really interesting journey, learning how to separate myself, Rebecca, from my alters, because we've always sort of been like jumbled together. Like I always thought like it all was me, but now being able to know their ages and know what they like doing and don't like doing, and knowing what their triggers are, and like sort of like learning like about myself for the first time. So learning my interests and what I like doing separate from theirs and what they like doing.
As you spoke about that, there's definitely many instances of perceiving of how long does this last, and to what effect does it. So within your personal experience, how often does DID come into place, and is there a way in order for you to negate this from happening, or is it kind of just as you said, there's triggers, but is there any ways that you can completely rid yourself of it, or will it always be a lasting effect?
That's a good question. So it impacts my day always, like every minute of the day, because having so many alters, like I can hear them, I can feel their feelings and hear their opinions. And like, for example, some of the kids didn't want me to speak on the podcast today because they were afraid. Every morning when I wake up, it's kind of like really chaotic in my head with everyone. So I have to work really hard in the mornings to ground us all and show them like what year it is and that the trauma is over. And all day long I'm having to like they have things they want to do, and most of them are kids, so they want to do kid things, but I'm an adult who like needs to do adult things. So it's always like constant conversation with them and trying to learn how to be like the leader of the system, which is hard. I'm definitely still in the learning process for sure. And as far as like a resolution to all of this, there's a couple different options. So one of them is called integration, and that happens when, like, once you've worked through all of the trauma and they've talked about their trauma and you get your memories back, then all of the alters can reintegrate into one person. So they would all sort of like reintegrate into me. And then I would just be me, Rebecca, without any alters inside. And the other option is we can work through all of our trauma. They can get like, healed from everything, and I can get my memories back, and then they can just stay and exist and still be inside me, but they won't be like really reactive, traumatized kids anymore. So they'd be healthy and healed, and life would be much easier. So those are the two options. I think my system and we don't really want to do integration, at least not right now. That feels like I care about my alters and feel like close to them, and I think it would be so weird to have them be gone or like integrated back into me.
Definitely. And, as you're experiencing this, is there any point in which you feel like you're lost within another alter? Like, is there any way that you can kind of ground yourself to know that you are Rebecca, whether it be, just simply writing down or, knowing what you do, like trying to speak with yourself and kind of differentiate? As you're saying, you hear different alters within your mind, and even for people who have one, if they don't have another identity within themselves, they even get lost within their mind of who I am, what am I doing? Can you speak about your perception of that when you have multiple alters in your head telling you different things?
Yeah, so I definitely get lost within them multiple times, like sometimes for days, where one of them comes out and takes control. And when that happens, it feels like I'm just like watching the body, watching our body, or watching what's happening, but not being able to control it. And that gets really frustrating because like I have one alter who's a kid who likes to come out and take control, and I like sometimes feel like I can't do anything about it. And it'll take a while to get myself back out and in control. And that is like a tricky situation because usually when one of them comes out and takes control of our body and our actions, it's because they're afraid or they're in a trauma reaction or they think we're about to die or having really bad PTSD or something. So usually what it takes to get me back is comforting whoever is out, which my therapist helps with that a lot, and reassuring them that they're safe and that it's safe for me to come back out and be in control. And if I can catch it before they get fully in control, then that helps a lot, which is why every morning I have to take a good amount of time to ground myself and connect to, we call them our alpha truths, because they're kids, so they can really connect. We saw the movie How to Train Your Dragon, where there's an alpha dragon, so that's kind of how they see ourselves, like I'm the alpha. And so we call them our alpha truths, where I just repeat out loud how we're safe and what year it is, and evidence that we're safe, and evidence that I can handle whatever emotions or memories come up. And so if I can do that enough, then I'm able to be in control for the day. And that also includes grounding, like physical grounding. So I will have them name like 5 things they can see, 4 things they can feel, 3 things they can hear, two things they can smell and one thing they can taste, just to get them like grounded in the present day instead of being lost in the past.
That's great. And for many people, I think, who have experienced a trauma or anything, truly debilitating, it's always the first instance for them to, run away, to not think back and to go back to that time in order, because of how, traumatic, of how challenging it can be to work through this issue. But within your instance, you have many alters that can bring you back to that time, or at least bring you back to the thought of what you experienced, just given that it's a part of you, and it still is today. So can you speak about how the healing process of working through your trauma is different because you have your old self attached to you at all times?
Yeah, it's hard and it's tricky. So I don't have a lot of the memories of the abuse because they hold it all. So I have a lot of the information that they've told me, but not a lot of the actual memories, which makes it hard for me. So the healing process for us right now has to do with therapy. That helps the most. So in therapy right now, my therapist specializes in DID. And so usually what happens during a session is they'll have my alters come out, or like one or two of them, or whoever's been struggling the most, and they do trauma work with her. So there's a lot of containment, which is sort of a visual thing where they're taking the memories of the trauma, and our brain is filtering them so they can be stored in like a healthy way and not give us flashbacks anymore or trauma reactions. And for me, what will begin to happen is that I will start to get more memories back once the system starts to feel safer and starts to feel like I can handle it, because right now they still want to protect me from the memories. But so the next step will be I'll start getting more memories back, and then I'll have to do the processing with my therapist about the memories that I have. So that's kind of the journey of healing for us, and it's definitely going to take a while just because there's 22 of us, so they all need to process the memories they hold with my therapist, and they all hold different memories. So depending on the age they are, that is the memories that they hold. So I have a bunch who are 5 years old. Not a bunch, I have like a couple who are 5, and they hold all the trauma that happened when I was 5 years old. And then I have a couple who are 8, so they hold all the trauma from that year, and some who are 11. So they have to process that individually with my therapist. And then I get the memories, and then I have to process it with my therapist.
It certainly is a task at hand, and certainly something that can't be done overnight. So it's definitely something that takes time healing, as you're saying, which is something that is a life task. It's not something that will be fixed right away. And within DID, I think there can be many misnomers, much misinformation about maybe what people experience, maybe even just what the disorder is, and kind of people looking at you a different light, or even looking at what you're experiencing in a different light. And I want you to take this time to speak about any misconceptions that there may be about DID, whether you've heard of it or whether you've seen it. Just take this time to speak about any misconceptions that you may have known of about DID that you want to share with.
Okay, yeah, definitely. I feel a lot of shame about having DID and afraid of telling the people that I knew before I was diagnosed. It's I don't really have a problem sharing about it with like new people who didn't know me before, but I feel like when I tell people who already knew me that I have DID, feel like they don't believe me, or that they think I'm making it up. And I get afraid of telling them that I have alters, and it's a really vulnerable thing for us to share with people. And I just find that there's like a ton of ignorance about it. People don't know what it is. People don't understand it. Even when I try to explain it to them, they don't understand it. Although I have noticed that a lot of people in the mental health community, or people who struggle with other mental illnesses, they are a lot more open to it and open to understanding it. So I do feel validated that way. Like, I have a mental health account on Instagram, and I post about my DID there, and everyone's been really supportive there. But sort of outside of that, I don't get a ton of support. Like, my parents, I told them, but they don't understand it at all. And that's what I find in a lot of people. And so that's frustrating and sad. And I have a couple friends who have DID, and one of them, her psychiatrist told her that DID doesn't exist, that it's not real. So there's some mental health professionals who also like don't think it's a real disorder, which is really disheartening, because I guess there's no like physical evidence, although I mean, I guess you could say that for like all mental illnesses. There's not always physical evidence, but there have been brain scans for people with DID, and let's say one alter is out and they get an MRI, and then they switch and another alter is out and they do another MRI. The brain scans are different, which is really cool. So I personally, as far as in the mental health community, haven't had a ton of pushback, but I would say most of the ignorance comes from outside the mental health community and from certain mental health professionals.
That's definitely something truly alarming, especially, when you look at how many people are, experiencing this, people experiencing, any type of challenge within mental health. And, we look at it today where there's still this large stigma wrapped around anything in terms of having any mental disability. And it's something that, these conversations need to hopefully reach the right ears so people can learn that it's not, something that people don't experience, and it's something of the norm that, like you're saying, we don't have physical evidence for a lot of what we're experiencing, but we have different types of tests, different types of actual stated, experiences and data that goes along with what people are going through. And hopefully, we can continue these conversations to hopefully broaden up people's perspectives. But, as you're saying, there's definitely going to be people out there that aren't going to be welcoming, or, you may feel shamed to do it. But, again, that brings about the importance of community and relationships, of, surrounding yourself with the right people and the people that are going to, support and care for you the most. So it brings about multi perspectives on what you should be able to do, and who you should surround yourself with. So I think that, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think many people face a lot of these misconceptions, whether it be DID, whether it be any type of mental health challenge today that offers, like you're saying, it's the shame that you feel, the self-worth that many people can't really open up to and share, whether it be somebody that they knew beforehand, or somebody new that they're meeting.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that really wraps up what we want to speak about in terms of just informational details about DID within part one of the episode. And within the next episode, we'll transition more into the deep causes in terms of the experience, in terms of steps to move forward, and more about what are ways that you're working within yourself at a daily, lifestyle in order to move forward, and what you would bring about as positive emotions as positive behaviors in order for people who are experiencing similar issues such as yourself. So I'd love to thank everybody for listening to this first part of the episode with Rebecca Hilliard. This has been episode number 8 of season 2 of the Mental Insights podcast. And be sure to tune into the next episode to hear more about dissociative identity disorder and the insights that Rebecca Hilliard has within this experience and within her life today. So thank you all for listening.
Thank you all for listening to today's episode of the Mental Insights podcast. Make sure to reach out to today's guest or myself if you need any advice, guidance, or support in your life today. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and review to this podcast so we know what you thought of this episode. I look forward to being in touch with you all in the next episode. I hope you all have a wonderful day.